Welcome to Lead Different, the podcast that redefines leadership and challenges the status quo. Hosted by Daniel Dominguez, founder and CEO of Why Not Leadership. This show is your compass to becoming a better leader through the power of self-awareness. Good leaders foster teams that are engaged, empowered, and energized. Join us on this transformative journey as we equip you with the tools and insights to lead different. Get ready to challenge the ordinary and embrace self-aware leadership. This is Lead Different.
Subscribe now. Discover a new era of leadership. Lead different, because great leaders change the world.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Lead Different podcast. Today, we have our guest, Dr. Nia Thomas. She is the Director of Thoughts and Ideas at Knowing Self and Knowing Others. Dr. Nia is an expert leader who talks the talk and walks the walk. She's an academically awarded thought leader in self-aware leadership and practices the self-aware leadership every single day in her role as a director in a children's charity. Dr. Nia is a frequent blog writer, a passionate podcast host of the Knowing Self, Knowing Others podcast, and the author of the Self-Awareness Superhighway book. She is on a mission to develop self-aware leaders to create kinder, more respectful, and creative working relationships through reflection, recognition, and regulation. She has spent 25 years working in the public sector across local government, the NHS, civil service, and in the last few years, a charitable sector in Wales and England. Nia describes her role as a charity director as what she does, and self-aware leadership as how she does it. You can imagine this is going to be a great conversation. So without further ado, let's welcome Dr. Nia Thomas. Hello, Nia. How are you doing today?
Hi, Dan. I'm really good. Really looking forward to this conversation.
Oh, man. We've met a few months ago. We had a couple of great conversations. You've had a lot going on. You had a book launch going, and I love what we were talking in the pre-show. You're calling it a book launch year. It's not a book launch event. It's not a book launch day, a book launch week or month. It's a book launch year. So it's been a while since we had that initial conversation, but I mean, as I read that introduction, there's so much that you do that really coincides with what we do at Why Not Leadership and what we want to feature on the Lead Different podcast. I mean, when we talk about working with leaders to create self-aware leaders, to create kinder, more respectful, and creative working relationships through reflection, recognition, and regulation, I mean, you're talking my language, Dr. Nia.
Absolutely.
So, Nia, thanks for being on the show today. Really appreciate you being here. Tell us, how is since I started with that, how did the initial book launch go? I know it's a book launch year. How's that going?
It's going really well, thank you. Yes, I had this idea that a book launch year gives me that sort of longevity. So it might turn out to be 5 years worth of book launch, who knows? But yes, I've done some book signings in my little city where I was born and where I was brought up, and I was able to gift a copy of my book to the school as a way of saying a very big thank you to the teachers who really instilled that passion in writing and reading and English literature, and yes, it was amazing. So yes, my ebook is doing well, my paperback is doing well, and I've got lots of copies here ready to send, and maybe I can send you one, Dan.
Oh, Nia, that would make my day. If you look behind me, and I share this with anyone, this is my office, but it's also where I record my podcast. And I love having books behind me that I've read recently. And, I love my good friend Paul Epstein's Better Decisions Faster. But I have a feeling I'm going to be telling everybody about this book because, as I said, at Why Institute, at Why I did work helping people discover their why and their why operating system. And then when I launched Why Not Leadership, it was really my mission was to help leaders be better through the power of self-awareness. And as you know, because you experienced it yourself, everything I do starts with the why OS discovery, understanding your why operating system, and then helping people understand themselves, or helping leaders understand themselves, understand their teams, having their teams understand each other, and then ultimately understanding the leader, because that's probably something that I'd love to get your insight on in the work that you've done, because when we do these workshops, and I'm sure you've done this too, Nia, You're working with the leader, and the leader is working to make sure that he or she understands their team better, and they want their team to do well. They want their team to be seen, heard, feel seen, heard, and understood and empowered, right? Sometimes in that process, we forget about the leader. And that's why I like to make sure we come back to, hey, by the way, team, here's your leader. You want to get to know him or her a little bit better. Let's find out about them. And that has been something that people really appreciate. So you wrote a book called The Self-Awareness Superhighway. Tell us a little bit about what is someone going to get out of that book? And I can't wait to get my copy. But if you had a minute to tell the world what's in the Self-Awareness Superhighway, and guess what? You do. You have as many minutes as you want, Nia. Tell us about Self-Awareness Superhighway.
So the purpose of the book is to really make people think about two things. Both the impact that we have on other people, because I often say this, that actually one of the things that is really important for me is to make sure that we don't make other people's work lives suck. So let's not do that. Let's build our awareness so that we are really conscious of the way that we behave towards others. So that's one part of it. The other part that I'm really looking to instill in people is that the way that we behave towards others comes back at us. So you can think about it in terms of reputation, or you can think about it in terms of your standing and your branding as a leader. So all of those things are important, and I often I deliver a workshop and I call it the bouncing ball of behaviour. And we throw a ball around a room, and then we stop and we think, if this ball was behavior, how then would we change the way that we throw it out into the world? Because one of the things that we probably don't think about, especially when we're in the world of work and we're busy and we're on the treadmill, is that we throw our behaviors out without necessarily thinking about, firstly, how that's going to land with somebody, and what happens when that ball comes right back at us. So those are the two things that I think is really important for people to consider when they pick up the book. So in part one, you will discover what self-awareness is. And I've got a 3-layer definition, and you mentioned a little part of it earlier. So it's reflection of your hard and relational skills, recognition of your impact, and regulation of your behavior. So people may have heard slightly different definitions of self-awareness, but mine's got those 3 parts. Then in part two, we move into talking about the self-awareness compass, which I've developed. And the compass has got 9 directions to it that have come from both my doctoral research and really backed up from the conversations that I've had with my podcast guests. I also talk about the signposts and the roadblocks that can both enable us in organizations and prevent us from moving forward. So that might be things like strategy, or it might be red tape and bureaucracy. So it both gives you an opportunity to consider how you fit, the contribution that you give to your organization, and then what the organization needs to do around you to really enable you to be a self-aware leader. And then in part 3, I talk about some of the tools that you can use to become more self-aware. So when I first started talking about self-awareness, I used to talk a lot about the definition, and people would often ask me, but how do I develop my self-awareness? So over the last 2 years, I've been collecting a list of all of the different ways that people suggest to me that you can develop your self-awareness. So there are things like tests, tools, and techniques. There's a conversation about mindfulness. There's a discussion about feedback, particularly when you're a leader. You're in a dangerous position of having filtered feedback and creating echo chambers. So feedback is something that we really talk about. And I also share my self-awareness compass quiz, which is something that I've developed as a way to give you an opportunity to score yourself against the 9 directions of the compass. Then you can send that on to up to 3 people, so your friends, family, colleagues. They can assess you, and you can have a map of the directions that you want to travel to help you to develop your self-awareness.
Wow, that's you know what? That is probably the best summary I've heard of a whole book, but I love that you've kept it really simple, 3 parts, and then each part has some real meat to it. You said a couple of things there that I wanna make sure we follow up on. First of all, when you talk about self-aware leaders, we have to understand the impact we have on others, and you talked about that. And I love the quote that you said, "We wanna make sure that we don't make other people's work life suck." There's a guest that I had on our podcast, and I've been a guest on his podcast. It's the Desuckify Work podcast. So I've got to make
Amazing.
sure I connect you with TJ Bennett out of Arizona, in the US, so that you can. I think if you can just I'm going to tell him, and when I introduce you, that you want to help people not make their work life suck. Hello, the Desuckify Work podcast is probably a place you need to be on. But I think oftentimes we concentrate, and then you talked about another important thing that I want to make sure we talk about is that filtered feedback. As leaders, we often aren't getting the true, honest feedback that would be most helpful to us because it's filtered because we're the boss. And so we're going to hear what we want to hear, not exactly what we need to hear so that we can get better. And then you talked about the bouncing ball of behavior. So thinking of our behavior as something that can come back to us, right? What if somebody just takes it and slams it right back at us? How would we feel? Um, Now tell me more about the bouncing ball of behavior, because I want to get into that so that our listeners who are, excuse me, often coaches and consultants who are doing this kind of work could get the most out of an activity such as that.
Well, what we start to do is we just throw a ball around a room. So I've usually got something from 15 to 20 people, and we just start throwing a ball. And it's very interesting. You will start to see people will throw it with a wild abandon. I've had somebody turn round and throw it backwards. Some people roll it on the floor. You often have people who say, "Oh, it's coming at me. No, I don't want it. I'm not very good at catching." And you observe all of those different behaviors that people are exhibiting around the room. And then you have the conversation about, now think of this ball as behavior. And you're really able to draw in all of those different reactions that people had, because all of those things are real when behaviors are being thrown around the room. So you may have somebody who has had a behavior thrown at them when they were looking somewhere else. Or you may have somebody who maybe is neurodivergent, and likes to be looking directly at the ball when it's being thrown. You may have somebody who has disabilities who prefers the ball to be rolled. But all of these things are just like behaviors, because if you haven't thought about the person who's receiving the ball,
Mm.
then it's quite likely that you're going to cause unrest, unhappiness, a sense of unfulfillment in your organization and your team. So you really do need to think about those things. And actually, if you have a team that's really played, and really had some fun with throwing a ball around, it really does give you that opportunity to take those behaviors and those experiences and reflect them back to the team. And it really, I think, something quite tactile, and it's quite visceral. And it really makes people think about behaviors in a different way, because, of course, we throw our behaviors out and they're invisible, as it were. But this really makes them visible.
Yeah. Wow. And I love that you talk about the visibility of behaviors, and self-aware leaders see their behavior and see the impact of their behaviors. You mentioned something else that's important that we talk about, the 9 behaviors or 9 directions of you have the self-awareness compass quiz. That's something that you've developed. As you know, at Why Institute and at Why Not Leadership, everything we do is based on why. We start with why, and there are 9 whys. For our listeners, can you tell us maybe briefly so that we understand what are the 9 directions that are part of the compass, the self-awareness compass?
Yes, so it's chartable. So it's a mnemonic, CHARTABLE. And I'll give you some of the behaviors that we're talking about. So C is care. And that is about how you behave, and it brings that humanity into the world of work. You may have somebody who's a carer for an elderly parent, and maybe they have to just go home and look after them for that period of time. Well, how do you demonstrate care? Then let's think about authenticity. Authenticity is one of those directions, and I think we're in danger of really commercializing the sense of authenticity, because I think we talk about authenticity with a capital A, and it's about ignoring what anybody else thinks. But let's take that back to what we really mean when we're talking about authenticity. We're talking about, what is my value? What is my belief? What are all of those things that are really important to me and mean that when I show up in work, I show up to my true values? It's not the same as wearing the type of clothes that you wear out to a nightclub on a Saturday night into the office on a Wednesday morning. That's not the kind of authenticity. Your authenticity has to be appropriate to the function that you're performing at the time. So, really think about authenticity as that core of you, as opposed to the things that are on the periphery. So, another one of the behaviors that we have within the compass is trust. And trust is an interesting one, because I can't make the decision that I'm going to be trustworthy. Trust is a lot of different things. It's about being consistent. It's about
Mhm.
operating with integrity. It's about being humble. It's about being open and honest. And it might be all of those things, and it might be different things in your organization, or the sector that you work in, or the particular profession that you hold. So trust is an interesting one. It's an essential behavior within the compass, but it's something that you can't do in isolation. And that's
Mm.
definitely something that we talk about as part of self-awareness, in terms of my definition, is that it's not something we can do alone. If we are introspective alone and we are simply reflective, that really doesn't give us that full picture of our self-awareness. So let's consider another one of the directions of the self-awareness compass. So listening. That
Mhm.
is something that we really have to think about, in terms of, how do we listen? Do we listen to respond? Do we cut people off halfway through? Do we listen to half of what's being said? Do we rush in to fix with problem solving when actually somebody hasn't finished telling you the problem? Do we talk over people who might be introverts in a situation that haven't had the opportunity to reflect and respond yet? So a listening is really important for listeners. And I was in a presentation last week, and somebody said we have two ears and one mouth, so that we can listen twice as much as we speak. And I really like that, and I'm definitely going to be using that. And the last behavior of the compass is experience. And really, experience is about experiential learning. It's both in terms of giving ourselves opportunities to learn, whether that is within our role or within different roles or from different people. And then experiential learning about sharing it with others. Because if you're a leader, you're a teacher. And actually, this week's podcast that's just gone live, that's the very thing that we talked about, that leaders are teachers and teachers are leaders. So think about experience, both you as an individual and the people around you, particularly if you're a leader.
That makes a lot of sense, and you're bringing up. I noticed we didn't cover all of them, so we talked about care, authenticity, trust, and listening. Are the 9 directions in the book? Are we going to see those in the book if we pick
Absolutely.
up the self-awareness superhighway? And how can we get the book? Let's talk about that. We want to make sure people know how to get it. We'll put that in the show notes when we go live with the interview. But tell us, where can we find the self-awareness superhighway?
Well, you can find it on Amazon, as you can probably guess. So there's an ebook and a paperback and a hardback, all on Amazon. But you can also buy it from Barnes and Noble, and if you're in the UK, you can buy it from the high street. So Waterstones, Foyles, Blackwell. And we all like to support our high street. So if you want to order it from your high street store, that will be wonderful.
That is fantastic. Yeah, because I definitely want to take a look at all 9, and you and I are due for another conversation anyway. I want to compare maybe the way some of these directions, because I can see authenticity. Trust is one of the 9 whys that we talk about. Listening, I don't know where that would fit. Experience, I like the way you've mapped that out. And so, how do you use those 9 directions as a self-aware leader to chart your course? I love that it's chartable too, which is such a great map type a word, because we're talking about a compass, right? So
Yeah.
tell us, so as a leader, let's take maybe you can give us an example of someone you've worked with where you've seen their results from the compass quiz, and then you've taken them in a different direction. Let's not use their name, but let's give an example of how it has helped them move forward in a better direction after discovering the directions that are most important to them.
Well, I've certainly had people, colleagues who have used the compass. And something that's really important about the compass is you will do the assessment for the first round, so part one, and you will assess yourself against the 9 compass points. So you have 0 to 9, and you're able to score yourself. Then, when you send it on to up to 3 friends, family, colleagues, they will also assess you against those 9 compass points. And you'll receive an aggregate score that will form a second line around your radar graph when you receive it. And what you're really interested in is the difference between your compass scores and your others' compass scores. So it's a self and others compass quiz. And what colleagues do is use that then to develop some action planning. So it might be that you have a very good working relationship with your manager, in which case, if there is a discrepancy between your scores in terms of listening or reflection, which is another one of
Mhm.
the behaviors and directions of the compass, you may want to have that conversation with your manager or your coach or your mentor to say, okay, what does this mean when people are saying that actually I think I'm really good at listening and other people don't think I'm quite as good at listening? Can you give me some examples of what that might look like? How might other people be perceiving me in this area? And therefore, what can I do about that? The same with reflection. If I think I'm particularly reflective, but other people don't, what can I then do to develop my reflective practice? Is it something that I want to put into my day-to-day practice, or do I want to ask my manager to support me with our regular supervisions? And they ask me to reflect on particular behaviors or situations that I've been in or work that I've done. So I think it's really good to think about your compass map as something that you can draw support in from other people to help you move forward. It might be that you prefer to work alone, but as we know, self-awareness and leadership, they're socially constructed, which means that they only really happen when we're in relationship with other people. So why not draw people in to help you work on those areas or those directions that you want to travel in a bit more often or a bit further, and you can use the skills of others. Think about that experiential learning, so you use their experience to help move you forward towards your self-awareness.
Wow. You know what? I'm so glad I asked that question. Yeah, because as I work, some of my work is individual one-on-one coaching, and I'm a Marshall Goldsmith stakeholder centered coach. And a lot of our work begins with self-awareness and an evaluation. And I think what I'm hearing is this gives you a really good look at the gap between where you think you are and where others see you, so you can choose, because a lot of that coaching that's going to happen in a Marshall Goldsmith stakeholder centered coaching experience is around leadership behaviors, and then choosing a behavior that we're going to improve on, whether that's a leadership behavior is listening or empathy or caring or reflection, right? Are you taking time to make good decisions based on the information? Now, is this a tool that's available to others, or is that a tool that just if you work with Dr. Nia Thomas, you get to use, or is that something you license out so that other coaches? Because I can see people listening to this show and saying, "Hey, that sounds like a tool I want to use with my clients." How would someone get a hold of that tool through you, or tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, it's a freely available on my website. So if you go to my website, ksko.co.uk, go to the resource section and you go to the compass quiz. My one of my aspirations for the next 2 or 3 years is to create it into a nice snazzy app. So at the moment it's a simple survey tool that you can access freely on the website.
So, can you tell us the website name again?
Yes, ksko.co.uk.
.co.uk. Love it. I know you're going to get a ton of traffic on that, Dr. Nia, and we'll put that in the show notes when we do the premiere so that everybody can just go plug it into their browsers and take a look at it. one of the things that I wanted to make sure we talked about, because and it's been a little while since we did it, but if you, for those that are fellow why coaches that are listening, you're all probably trying to guess Dr. Nia's why, how, and what. So I'm going to let you off the hook and tell you a little bit about the results that we got, because again, this is about self-awareness, and I knew Dr. Nia would be very interested in another self-awareness tool. So we gave her the YOS Discovery, and her results came back, and these are great results. And I mean, everybody has great results. We're going to say that about everyone, but what I really like about your results, especially for someone with an advanced doctoral degree, is contribute, to make a difference in the life of others is your why. Your how is to make sense of the complex and challenging in order to help people move forward. And your what is to simplify, make things simple and easy to understand. So if I was to put that in a statement, you believe that success happens when we contribute to the success of others. And how you do that is by helping them make sense of the complex world of self-awareness, and what you deliver are simple solutions that are easy to implement and simple. Now, how did that describe you when I know we had our conversation, but let our listeners know how that felt when we first talked about it.
It was incredibly accurate, and I've never heard myself reflected back in that way before. So, well, of course, there are other tests, tools, and assessments that you can use, but I really like the way that this grouped my behaviors and my why in this professional way. I think actually, if I had to pin down my values and my beliefs, I think these fit absolutely. And they reflect both the fact that I work in the public sector, and I often think about, would I want to move into the commercial sector? And I'm not sure if it feels right, because actually I prefer focusing on the people rather than the pounds or the dollars.
The
Depends
dollars,
on
right?
where you're listening. So that absolutely makes sense. The simplification and making sense, that also fits really well together. One of the things that I always knew I wanted to do when I started my doctorate, it was probably even before I opened the first book, I always knew that whatever came from it, I wanted to make it really useful for other people, because what was the point in doing a 90-word thesis and putting it on the bookshelf and letting it gather dust? So that purpose was always to be helpful and to be useful. So that absolutely fitted with the results. And this idea of simplification, oh God, that is so really accurate. One thing I really love to do is particularly in my world of work, is to take complex situations, complex narratives, and to simplify them. The way I like to write is that I like to have the structure of a document, and then I fill it in. So for me, I have to have the headings first. And sometimes you can only get those headings through that simplification. So yeah, it's so accurate. And I really liked it as a way of being able to describe myself to others. Just going back to what you said earlier on, was that yes, you have to get to know your leader. And if you happen to be the leader in a situation, you need to have the vocabulary and the terminology to be able to describe yourself to others. And I think this is a great way of doing that.
Yeah, and I love, thank you first of all for sharing your thoughts, and I'm glad that they were fresh in your mind still, because you truly are someone, just even in our conversation here and the conversations we've had, you truly are someone who wants to make a difference in the lives of others. You're here to make a difference in the world, and everything you do seems to aim in that direction, from your public sector work to even the work that you're doing, writing the book and putting a guide out there so that people can understand the importance of understanding themselves so they can be better leaders. And then I love that even as you were talking about, helping people make sense, simplifying things so that they can make sense of it. And that is such a great thing to have in someone who has a doctorate in business administration. That's a rare doctorate degree, but I can see that knowledge just pouring out of you, all those years of schooling and all of it coming together in a simple way that's easy for people to use. And you mentioned something else when we were talking about your website, Knowing Self, Knowing Others. That is your podcast. Tell us about the Knowing Self, Knowing Others podcast, because There are people that are listening that I think, well, I know for a fact that I know you and TJ Bennett have to switch shows. You've got to be on his Desuckify Work podcast, but I have lots of friends that have fabulous podcasts, and we want to make sure we get the word out about you, the Knowing Self, Knowing Others podcast, and of course the Self-Awareness Superhighway. So tell us a little bit about who's your ideal guest for the Knowing Self, Knowing Others podcast, and what's the purpose of it?
So, the purpose of the podcast really is to bring this idea of self awareness to life. After I finished my doctorate, I knew I wanted to write a book, but I wasn't really sure how you translated the academic written piece into a business book. So I kept thinking about it, and about a year later, I was still thinking about it. And I remember thinking, if I don't do something with self awareness, then I'm not going to be able to keep it alive. I'm not going to keep it relevant. So I made the decision, why not do a podcast? And all of my podcast episodes are interview based because I really wanted to have this conversation with people who are talking the talk and walking the walk, which is really important to me. So the guests that I've had on the show, they are executive coaches, they are psychologists, they are psychiatrists, and I have a number of chief executives and C-suite professionals who are able to talk about leadership from the perspective of having lived it. And that's something that I'm really trying to move into in terms of the podcast, is to talk to leaders about their journey. So talking the talk and walking the walk. I want to hear about what it was like for them when they moved into leadership and suddenly realized that actually people were observing them far more frequently than they were before. And this notion that as leaders we cast a long shadow, and that realization of the impact that you have on others, that as a leader you may say something in a conversation to 2 or 3 people, but they may line manage 20 or 30 people, and actually what you've said now filters out into those 20, 30 people. So you really have to think about your behavior. So for me, those are those special elements.
One of the things we talked about in the pre-show is the importance of relational skills, right? Soft skills. You call relational skills soft skills. What's the difference? Why do you call soft skills relational skills, and why do we have to make that distinction?
Well, I think by referring to soft skills, we're proliferating this idea that they are soft and fluffy and they don't really matter. But
Mhm.
actually, we know that the soft skills, those relational skills, are the hardest to acquire, they're the hardest to master, and you're mastering them every day. That actually, there may be somebody that you are in rapport with, but then you meet somebody new in your world of work and you have to develop that relationship all over again. So I tested out a few different terms for soft skills, and I did a LinkedIn poll and a Facebook poll, and actually this was the preferred option, that relational skills. And for me, the way that I describe self-awareness as being socially constructed, this idea of a relationship really did make sense. So actually, I referred to hard skills and relational skills because I think they really convey what we're talking about in terms of the kind of interactions that self awareness is trying to support with. So, soft doesn't really convey just how difficult those relational skills are.
And I like, you know what? I like getting away from that word. Soft also makes it sound like it's not that important. It's soft. It's not
Exactly.
necessarily relational. We're talking about relationships. How well do you relate to others? And it's a skill that all leaders must have, right? Soft skills, if you can get if you have strategic skills, if you have uh the skills to run a business, you need those soft skills. You almost can push them away. I think what you found and what I'm hearing from you is people are very important, and relating to
Absolutely.
people in a way that helps them feel valued and makes them understand, and that helps them feel understood. I think that's a big part. In our world, we talk about being seen, feeling seen, heard, and understood. I'm
Yes.
sure you work a lot in that area. What are some of the biggest gaps? Because you've interviewed lots of leaders. You mentioned you interview CEOs, you interview executive coaches and consultants. What are some of the biggest gaps that most people have, that what is a common theme that leaders say, wow, if more leaders had this world would be so much better? What's a common theme that you're hearing in the interviews or in the work that you're doing?
I think one of the things that constantly comes back is this idea of strategic level disconnect. And and I can understand why it is so prevalent because people are busy. So strategic level disconnect is the phrase that I give to leaders who have moved away so far from the operational end of their organization that maybe they don't realize that their ideas, their strategies are challenging to implement or maybe unfeasible or unpalatable. And it's that strategic level disconnect that we have to really work hard at as leaders to bridge. And that means that you have to be visible, that you have to talk to the people in your organizations, you have to understand, you have to listen, and you really have to ensure that there is inclusive decision making. So, inclusive decision making was identified as a mitigator for strategic level disconnect. But I think when you're in times of stress, when there is crisis, you will revert to shutting the office door, getting your head down, and getting busy with the work that you have to focus on.
Mm.
But I think that as a leader, you really have to be very conscious to stop and you have to focus on the people in your organization to enable them, to support them, to direct them, to guide them. Because without that, there is this sense of being lost without direction, and nobody knows where we're going as an organization. Are we implementing our strategy? Are we not? So I think that strategic level disconnect, it hasn't gone away whilst I've been talking to people on my podcast and about self-awareness for the last 2 or 3 years, and that is still there. I think the other challenge that we have, which has similarities with strategic level disconnect, is this filtered feedback. Because I think unless you are active in seeking feedback as a leader, that filtered feedback will happen. So I think you have to be very deliberate in your exercise to seek feedback or feed forward, however you choose to do that. But it has to be something that you do actively. I think if you are passive in seeking feedback, you will have that filtered feedback and you will develop an echo chamber. And I think you need to create that psychological safety where people know that they can share, and then you have to create the environment where they can share safely.
I like the thought of the echo chamber because that for sure. If I used to joke when I was in corporate and as I rose, the more I got promoted, the funnier I became. Oh,
Yeah,
nobody doesn't laugh at your jokes when you're a senior leader, right?
yeah,
And then you go to your friends and you tell the same joke and they're like, "Boy, that's a terrible joke." No, it killed. I was at my manager's meeting and everybody was rolling. No, it's not really that you're that funny. It's that everybody feels kind of a pressure to go along with your decision. So I think that the importance of seeking honest feedback. And you mentioned psychological safety is so important. People have to feel safe that they can give you that feedback. So what are some ways, and that is a big part of what we do when we're working with the Marshall Goldsmith stakeholder centered coaching, because we got to get that feed. I love that you use the word feed forward. What is it that we can do so moving forward, because the past is done, right? Nia, you hurt my feelings at that last meeting, and I really, you know what? That's done. What can Nia do moving forward so that that doesn't happen again? So let's take that feed forward. So Dan, when you say things in this manner, it doesn't make me feel good. So what if instead of doing that, you brought it up this way? What are some of the best ways that leaders can help their people feel psychologically safe to give you the feedback that you need so that you can be better?
one very simple thing that I have done in the last 2 years, and I probably need to do it again actually, is that I sought feed forward. I put out an anonymous survey to my team and asked them those very questions of what can I do differently? What could I do more of? What could I do less of? And those three questions and people had the opportunity to write what they wanted to. And something that was important for me was to be able to demonstrate that I'd learned from that, because I think you need to have the "you said, we did." You need to be able to give people that opportunity to see that you're actually taking their feedback, you're valuing it, and that you're implementing it. So I know that one of my colleagues has actually done the same, or a very similar feed forward exercise with their team, and the feedback that they had was really rich, and they were able to make some real changes in their practice to make a difference to the relationships with their colleagues. So I think I really would recommend that leaders are proactive in doing that. And I think when you are a leader and you're seen to be actively seeking feedback, such as one of my colleagues, they did the same. So I think it creates that environment, that safe environment where we ask these questions because we want to improve. So I think that's one excellent way of doing it. And another way of seeking feedback is if you want to do 360s in your organization. What I would say, if you're going to do a 360 assessment, is that you ensure that there is a facilitator between you and the individuals that are feeding back. Because I think with 360s, there is that potential to really erode psychological safety in the workplace. I certainly worked in an organization where they had used 360s, but the manager identified the people who would complete the 360 about them. So, as you can imagine, the 360s were all wonderful. Like you said, everybody laughed at the jokes. So I think you need to make sure that you've got that anonymization, that facilitation in between the individual that's being assessed and the people that are providing that feedback, to make sure that you maintain that psychological safety and that the feedback can be received in the way that it's meant, and then that leader can act on that.
That's really good. I think we have to stay away as leaders, right? From picking our fan club, right? I'm going to pick everybody who just loves my work and or is
Absolutely.
dependent on me to give me my feedback, and so that you get nothing but glowing feedback. But I think one way to really, and you mentioned it, one way to make sure that that doesn't happen is providing anonymity. So if
Yeah.
you have somebody, a go-between, and that's such an important key, you're going to get that feedback. That person that was laughing at your joke, you can have a room where the whole room was cracking up and you pick 7 people from that room. You might get some really good constructive feedback, things that, or as you mentioned, feed forward, things that you can change. And I love the simplicity of the 3 questions. And it's really 3 simple questions. What can I do more of? What can I do less of? And what can I do differently? So
Yeah.
it's 3 questions, and you're going to get a lot of information from those 3 questions that can really help you move forward. We've been talking for over 40 minutes, and I've enjoyed just listening to you, because you've got some amazing strategies that leaders can use in their self-awareness. I definitely want to make sure I spend more time with you, Dr. Nia, so that we can talk about the kind of clients that we can help. And I'm looking forward to getting my copy of the book. Number one. Number two, I'm going on your website and looking at the compass quiz, the to look at the 9 directions, because I think it's going to be really helpful for the clients that I work with. So thank you for sharing that with all of us here, and that's at ksko.co.uk, right?
KSKO.co.uk.
Okay, fantastic. So we're going to go there. I always like to finish with this question, because we are Why Not Leadership. So I like to ask about a time in your life when you said why not to something, a why not moment, a time in your life when you said why not to an opportunity, a career change, a big decision, and you're so glad you did it. Tell us a little bit about that.
Oh, that's a really good question. I think it would have to be our move from Wales to England. So, about 5.5 years ago, I had the opportunity to take voluntary redundancy from my organisation. And I always thought that I'd work in the public sector in Wales. But when I was looking for other opportunities, if I wasn't going to be working there, where would I go? London was the one place that really attracted me, and that's where the opportunities were. So I said to my husband, "Shall we go and live in London?" And we said, "Yeah, why not?"
Why not? And you're so glad you did it, right?
Absolutely, yes. I mean, I've had so many opportunities here, and yes, worked in different organisations. And England is actually quite different politically and structurally than Wales. So actually, I've learned a whole new system of National Health Service and local authorities and how charities work with each other. So yes, it's been an amazing opportunity. I'm sure we will go home to Wales at some point, but this is where we are right now.
Well, I love that you said it just perfectly. For those that that aren't familiar with the terminology, tell us what is voluntary redundancy? Taking voluntary redundancy.
So voluntary redundancy in the UK is, for me, the situation was that I was in a senior role. I had a colleague in a senior role, and they decided to merge the two roles. And the options are that you put your hat in the ring and you apply for the role and you are interviewed, etc., etc., or you are redeployed into the organization. If they happen to have a role at the same level, you might be able to go sideways, but if not, you are offered roles that are less senior to where you are. Or if you are lucky, and you've worked more than 2 years within an organization, you have a financial package, which is your redundancy package. And the organization was offering voluntary redundancy. So I took the opportunity. I took the little pot of money that I thought I might never have this again. And we said we will take it to London, and we will live the London life for a few years and see what happens.
Well, it sounds like you've done a lot of good with it. It's really been so fun to hear you talk about the work that you do. I can tell that you're passionate about it. I can tell that you're making a difference in the lives of the clients with whom you work, and I can tell that the leaders that are on your show are putting out information I think all of us need. So, thank you very much for being on the show, Dr. Nia Thomas. We are looking forward to sharing your book, sharing your podcast with others. And what do you say we end the show on that note?
Amazing. Thank you, Dan. I've really enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nia Thomas. Let's follow her. We can find you on LinkedIn,
You
Dr.
certainly
Nia
can.
Thomas. We can find her. Her website is ksko.co.uk. Let's stay in touch, Dr. Nia. Thank you, everybody, for listening to us on the Lead Different podcast. Don't forget to follow, like us, and share your comments on what you thought about the show today. And we'll see you next week with another episode of the Lead Different podcast.
This is Lead Different.
Subscribe now. Discover a new era of leadership. Lead different because great leaders change the world.